This wasn't just a movie about betrayal, it was betrayal weaponized. In Extreme Prejudice, the gunfights land heavy, not flashy. Every line of dialogue feels like a report, and every death is treated less like drama and more like paperwork. Released in 1987 under Walter Hill's stripped-down direction, the film introduced us to Jack Benteen, Nick Nolte's hard-boiled Texas Ranger waging war on both drug cartels and hidden agendas. But what made it to theaters was only the visible half of the operation. Behind the camera, the production played a far more dangerous game. Former military contractors stood in for background extras. Tactical scenes were mapped with an authenticity that raised eyebrows far beyond Hollywood. There were whispers of script consultants with intelligence backgrounds and edits that smelled more like redactions than rewrites. This wasn't a standard action flick. It was a blueprint veiled in celluloid. The MPAA almost stamped the film with an NC-17, not for gore, but for realism. Hill had to remove entire beats, blur out implications, and muffle the film's most unsettling truths. It wasn't about violence, it was about what kind of violence and who was allowed to portray it. What remained was still explosive. But if you look closely, you'll sense the shadows of scenes that were never meant to be public. Extreme Prejudice didn't just tell a story, it circled one, implied another, and maybe, just maybe, covered something up. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Extreme Prejudice. Fact Hassan. Some of the actors were trained to kill. Not every face on screen came from casting call. Several of the men portraying members of the elite zombie unit weren't actors at all. They were former U.S. Special Forces operatives. Their movements were precise, their silence too practiced. These weren't performances, they were habits forged in real conflict. Walter Hill reportedly wanted a kind of realism that couldn't be rehearsed. He brought in real ex-military to serve not just as background players, but as technical advisors. They adjusted gun handling on set, corrected posture, and even rewrote how certain characters moved during scenes. At least one crew member said the difference was visible in the eyes. Those weren't stage expressions. But things got stranger. One extra never signed standard contracts. Another went uncredited entirely. Studio documents list them under code names or were redacted in later releases. One man, whose real identity remains unknown, reportedly left the set mid-shoot and no one ever saw him again. In a movie about soldiers operating in legal gray zones, the presence of real operatives blurred more than the line between fiction and reality. It raised an unsettling thought. What happens when you hire real ghosts to haunt your story? Fact #2. It was nearly rated NC-17 for psychological realism. The MPAA didn't balk because of blood. They hesitated because the film felt true. When Hill submitted his initial cut, the ratings board flagged not the violence itself, but the way it was portrayed calculated, uncinematic, and eerily procedural. The gunfire didn't follow typical action beats. It echoed like military records, brief, final, without flair. Internal memos labeled the film as having excessive combat realism, with concerns that it glorified covert assassination. Whole sequences were either trimmed or softened. Lines that alluded to real-world intelligence tactics were dubbed over. Even the rhythm of certain scenes was altered to dull their impact. Hill complied only to avoid commercial restriction, but many believed the forced edits made the story more disturbing because the parts that were removed hinted at truths the final cut could no longer explain. It wasn't the bloodshed that shook the censors. It was the sense that these men had done it all before off-screen. Fact #3. The film was built on the bones of the Wild Bunch. Before Extreme Prejudice was its own beast, it was meant to inherit someone else's shadow. Early in development, the film was quietly conceived as a modern reinterpretation of The Wild Bunch, a fading morality play, drenched in gunpowder and regret. Both films follow hardened men bound by dying codes, and both end in eruptions of violence meant less to thrill than to bury something. John Milius was originally approached to shape the script. Known for his unapologetic love of war and the myth of the American warrior, Milius envisioned the project as The Wild Bunch, reborn under Reagan-era tension. Though he departed the project before shooting, his fingerprints remained in the themes: brotherhood corroded by politics, violence as obligation, and men too old to be saved. Walter Hill leaned into that DNA. He structured several scenes as homage, some say replication. A specific death sequence mirrors a Peckinpah shot-for-shot composition. But unlike The Wild Bunch, Hill never let sentimentality leak through. He kept the blood cold. And the title? It came from a real Vietnam-era execution phrase. So the next time you watch The Standoff, ask yourself, are these outlaws or soldiers already dead? Fact #4. Powers Booth nearly lost his role to a real agent. The man who became Cash Bailey was almost replaced by someone who actually hunted men like him. Before Powers, Booth was locked in as the film's charismatic antagonist. An unexpected candidate lobbied hard for the part, a DEA officer with a history of undercover operations in Central America. His pitch? Real-world experience. He promised grit that couldn't be faked. Studio executives reportedly entertained the idea. Some even saw potential for free press. A federal agent playing a drug lord on screen, revealing the criminal psyche from the inside. But Walter Hill was unmoved. He refused to let reality override performance. His stance was clear: I need a character, not credentials. Booth remained and delivered a performance that was both magnetic and chilling. Calm, persuasive, and lethal without ever raising his voice, he embodied a man who'd crossed too many lines to remember which side he was on. In the end, Hill chose the illusion over the insider. Ironically, it made the fiction more believable. Fact #5. A major scene was pulled after a security warning. A pivotal shootout was planned deep within a simulated military facility, complete with realistic weaponry, formations, and tactics modeled on declassified missions. It was supposed to be the film's most ambitious action sequence, but shortly after rehearsals began, the scene vanished. Not due to creative changes, but because someone outside the production saw early footage and made a phone call. According to accounts from crew members, a federal contractor flagged the choreography as resembling a real Black Ops scenario. Days later, TriStar received a formal advisory citing concerns over sensitive procedural mimicry. The studio acted fast. The scene was cut, destroyed, and never acknowledged again. Some insiders claimed it was too close to a Cold War-era mission that had never been fully disclosed. Others said Hill was furious but helpless. Whatever truth lay in the footage, it never reached audiences. But its absence casts a longer shadow than any scene left in. Fact #6. It sparked a political uproar across the border. The border-crossing tension in Extreme Prejudice wasn't limited to the screen. Following a private screening attended by Mexican diplomats in Los Angeles, outrage erupted. The portrayal of Mexico as a battleground for American covert activity and lawless power plays led to a formal protest from the Mexican consulate. Officials condemned the film's imagery as reckless fiction dressed as fact. In response, the film's Latin American release was delayed. Studio reps were sent to calm tensions. In some Mexican cities, theaters refused to screen it altogether. Print ads were pulled. Interviews were canceled. TriStar scrambled to downplay the controversy, issuing statements about the fictional nature of the plot. But the damage lingered. What began as a stylized action piece had wandered into international territory, suggesting that some borders aren't just geographical, they're political fault lines waiting to rupture. Fact #7. Walter Hill shot the bare minimum. Intentionally, on most sets, directors flood editors with options, wide shots, close-ups, alternate takes. Walter Hill did the opposite. He captured only what he wanted and nothing more. For Extreme Prejudice, Hill treated every shot as final. No extra angles, no coverage for later flexibility. His camera setups were deliberate, almost militant. Cinematographer Matthew Leonetti later remarked that Hill's shooting style left editors with no wiggle room because there was nothing to wiggle with. Hill believed in commitment. He wanted scenes to feel locked, not sculpted in post-production. In doing so, he forced the pacing to reflect the emotional rigidity of the characters. The final standoff sequence, for example, contains almost no cutaways. Instead, the tension mounts as we're forced to stay in each character's skin, no relief, no breath. The result is a film that doesn't flinch, it stares. And in a story about men trained to make irrevocable decisions, Hill's method was fitting. There were no do-overs. Fact #8. Nick Nolte, trained with a ranger who had killed. To become Jack Benteen, Nick Nolte didn't just study lawmen, he shadowed one who lived on the edge of the law's shadow. Nolte spent time with a veteran Texas Ranger known for operating in some of the state's most dangerous territory. The Ranger wasn't a desk sergeant. He had shot people, tracked fugitives across state lines, and carried a silence that spoke more than stories. Nolte followed him on routine patrols and silent car rides. He studied how the man wore his hat, how he paused before speaking, how he never drew his weapon unless it was the only option left. The Ranger wasn't theatrical, he was surgical. That precision bled into Nolte's performance. His slow movements, minimal expressions, and tense stillness weren't rehearsed, they were observed. He didn't portray a Ranger, he absorbed one. The real Ranger made one visit to set. He watched a scene, gave no notes, and left. That was all Nolte needed. Fact #9. The Black Ops unit was based on a real black file. The idea of a team of soldiers listed as dead but still operational sounds like fiction, but it's been whispered about in defense circles for decades. In Hill's film, the zombie unit is a group of covert operatives, presumed Kia, now working off the books. That premise wasn't conjured from nowhere. During script development, Hill and screenwriter Harry Kleiner reportedly uncovered references to a Cold War-era initiative involving soldiers officially declared dead and reassigned to untraceable missions, known in some circles as Project Rebirth. The alleged program involved wiping identities clean and deploying operatives to volatile regions with no paper trail and no extraction guarantee. If caught, they didn't exist. Whether the program truly existed is still debated, but the film's uncanny accuracy in depicting black chain of command protocols and psychological detachment struck a nerve. Some former intelligence personnel even admitted that certain character dynamics felt uncomfortably familiar. What if Extreme Prejudice didn't invent the Ghost Unit but simply changed its name? Fact Hassan Zero. An alternate ending was screened once then destroyed. There was a different ending, one far more explosive, and it was shown to exactly one audience. During early cuts of Extreme Prejudice, a deleted final scene was screened for studio executives. In it, Nolte's character confronts and executes a high-ranking American official during a secret desert rendezvous, an unflinching, cold-blooded moment that flipped the film's narrative into full-blown political subversion. No music, no speech, just a silenced pistol and a hollow desert sky. The scene was reportedly met with stunned silence. Within days, the reel was ordered removed. The official reason cited narrative misalignment, but multiple crew members believed it was something else, pressure from entities not credited in the production note. The footage was never released, never archived, it's presumed destroyed. But one editor claimed that before deletion, they wrote down a phrase seen on the discarded folder in the scene, PHX 1969. A meaningless label or a code someone didn't want decoded? Fact Hassanon, Jerry Goldsmith, left the project after a creative clash. Legendary composer Jerry Goldsmith was originally slated to score Extreme Prejudice, but the collaboration collapsed before a single cue was recorded. Goldsmith envisioned a layered, emotionally textured score, full of tension, rising motifs, and moral ambiguity. Hill had the opposite vision. Stripped, down, minimal, dominated by percussion and silence. When Goldsmith pushed back, reportedly calling the film soullessly brutal, Hill responded by terminating the partnership. In the end, Ry Cooder was brought in to create the final score, sparse, moody, and built around unsettling rhythms instead of traditional orchestration. It wasn't grand, but it worked. Goldsmith never publicly addressed his departure. Hill refused to elaborate in interviews, but some insiders claim their disagreement was less about music and more about what the score was supposed to feel like. Was it a difference in taste, or an argument over whether violence should ever feel poetic? Fact Hassan 2. The title came from a phrase used in covert kill orders. The phrase Extreme Prejudice isn't just an ominous title, it's a euphemism with blood on its hands. Coined during the Vietnam War era, terminate with extreme prejudice became military intelligence shorthand for unsanctioned assassination. It was used in memos, whispered in briefings, and embedded in field reports tied to controversial programs like Operation Phoenix. Walter Hill knew exactly what he was invoking when he named the film. It wasn't about style, it was about intent. His characters weren't just killers. They were authorized ones, men who operated in zones where legality was flexible and orders were absolute. By adopting the phrase as the title, Hill did more than set a tone. He sent a signal. The violence in Extreme Prejudice wasn't fantasy, it was policy, thinly veiled in fiction. So the next time someone tells you it's just a movie, ask them who invented the phrase on the poster. Fact Hassan 3. The role of Hackett was meant for a horror veteran. Michael Ironside brought quiet menace to Major Hackett, but he wasn't the original choice. The part was first offered to Tom Atkins, a cult favorite in the horror world known for roles in Night of the Creeps and Halloween 3. Atkins liked the script until he read deeper into Hackett's psyche. The character wasn't conflicted, just detached, emotionless, clinical. According to someone close to casting, Atkins turned it down, saying, "This guy isn't a man, he's a weapon that forgot it was human." When Ironside came in, he didn't blink. He stripped Hackett of hesitation. His performance was cold, professional, and unnervingly calm. Hill encouraged improvisation, and Ironside allegedly coined one of the film's most unsettling lines. "We're not here to win, "We're here to finish." Would Atkins have brought more emotion? Possibly. But Ironside's version felt like the embodiment of a classified directive. Hackett wasn't a villain, he was policy. Fact Hasson 4. They didn't find the town, they built it from nothing. Most films find a location and adapt it. Extreme Prejudice did the opposite. Instead of searching for a gritty Texas border town, TriStar Pictures approved the construction of an entirely artificial settlement near El Paso. The design wasn't based on aesthetics, it was based on tactics. Walter Hill wanted the layout to make sense for a firefight, blind corners, layered elevations, and visibility line. Hill brought in consultants, including one ex-military strategist, to advise on placement of buildings, alleyways, and line-of-sight angle. The final product wasn't a film set, it was a simulation, a space designed not just to be filmed, but fought through. After production, the town was left standing. Law enforcement used it for training. Urban explorers discovered it years later, half collapsed but eerily intact. It was a fictional town built to model real violence, and it outlived the movie. Fact Hasson 5. A real gunfight happened nearby, and the crew didn't stop. One night during filming, reality bled onto the edge of the set. The crew was setting up for a late-night shoot when gunshots echoed from nearby. At first, they assumed it was sound testing. Then the sound grew louder, automatic, chaotic. It was real. Authorities later confirmed it was a turf conflict between rival smugglers just beyond the set's perimeter. Law enforcement descended on the site quickly, making arrests and recovering weapons. But here's the twist. Walter Hill never called cut. The crew kept rolling, capturing distant flashes and real panic among background players. While none of the footage made the final cut, multiple sources claim it was reviewed by editors and influenced how the film's climactic shootout was edited less theatrical, more chaotic. They didn't recreate reality. They were in it, and they used it. Fact Hasson 6. The US military wanted to vet the script. The Pentagon doesn't usually take an interest in mid-budget action thrillers. This time, they did. Before cameras rolled, the Department of Defense reportedly submitted 2 separate requests to review the Extreme Prejudice script. Officially, the goal was to avoid misrepresenting operational protocol. Unofficially, there was concern that the story's depiction of rogue soldiers and covert kill squads was treading too close to real-world programs. Walter Hill rejected the first request without hesitation. The second time, the studio relented quietly, passing along a later draft to a contact within the military. A few days later, several scenes were altered or removed. No explanation, just changes. Lines referencing real programs were sanitized. Certain names disappeared. Even a scene involving a questionable chain of command scenario was rewritten to feel more ambiguous. The military never publicly acknowledged their involvement, but the shadows they left on the script are still visible if you know where to look. Fact Hasson 7. The original opening caused a test screening meltdown. The first version of Extreme Prejudice didn't open with a bang, it opened with a funeral. Test audiences were shown a version where the movie began with the execution of a captured federal agent, intercut with haunting flashbacks of his time in uniform. There was no score, no filter, just the slow unraveling of a man's dignity, followed by a final, brutal silence. The reaction? Audiences didn't just dislike it, they panicked. One viewer reportedly screamed that the scene felt too real to be fiction. Several walked out. A few assumed it was based on an actual leaked video. Studio heads immediately ordered a reshoot. The final film begins with a tense, more stylized confrontation stripped of personal backstory. Walter Hill reportedly fought to keep the original scene, calling it the only honest way to introduce this story. He lost. And so the version we got starts one beat after the truth. Fact Hasson 8. A former CIA officer said the film was too accurate. Not long after Extreme Prejudice hit theaters, an obscure interview surfaced in a niche intelligence newsletter. The subject was a retired CIA field operative, only referred to as GR. When asked if Hollywood ever came close to exposing real tradecraft, he offered a short, loaded response. Extreme Prejudice was close. Too close. It didn't get the names right, but the methods were there. He refused to elaborate. The quote vanished into obscurity, but word spread among ex-military circles, online forums, and conspiracy theorists who were already dissecting the film frame by frame. Fans began mapping the fictional zombie unit onto known but unconfirmed Black Ops programs. Theories emerged about the film being an intentional leak, disguised as fiction. Hill, for his part, never acknowledged any of it. But if a man who lived in the shadows says, "You've told too much," maybe you did. Fact 9. One cast member vanished after filming. Among the background cast of Extreme Prejudice, one man simply disappeared. Credited only as R. Sloan on early call sheets, he played a supporting operative within the Black Ops unit. Not a speaking role, but present in nearly every tactical sequence. Crew described him as intensely focused, unusually quiet, and often separated from the rest of the cast even during downtime. After the shootout sequence wrapped, he left the set and never came back. Not for voice dubbing, not for press, not even for post-production contact. His agency couldn't be reached. His Screen Actors Guild record showed no other credits. One assistant recalled trying to mail him a residual check, only to discover the listed address no longer existed. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered he wasn't an actor at all, just someone placed into the production, a placeholder, an embedded observer, or something else. His scenes are still in the final cut. His name isn't. In a film filled with characters who are supposed to be dead, maybe one of them really was. Fact #20. Military bases quietly took it off the shelves. Extreme Prejudice never made any official banned film lists, but in certain military circles, it quietly disappeared. Shortly after release, several U.S. military bases, particularly those abroad, received unofficial guidance, discouraging screenings of the film. The reason? Its portrayal of unsanctioned operations, chain of command breakdowns, and the existence of covert teams that mirrored whispered real-world units. While not a formal prohibition, the impact was clear. Base theaters canceled showings, PX stores pulled the VHS from shelves. The film's name never appeared on internal bulletins again. When questioned, a spokesperson said only, "We prefer to offer films that reinforce clarity of command." Nothing was burned, nothing was condemned. But in its absence, the film became more dangerous, more true. Sometimes, silence is the loudest rejection. Bonus fact: a code appears in the final frame and no one will explain it. It's easy to miss a faint sequence of letters and numbers scrawled on a corner of a document during the film's final seconds. You'd have to freeze frame it. Even then, most would overlook it. The string reads OP 722 divided by PHX 1969. No one involved in production has ever explained what it means. It wasn't in the original script. It wasn't in the dialogue. And yet, there it is. Brief, static, and unsettlingly specific. Viewers with sharp eyes and sharp memories tied the PHX 1969 reference to Operation Phoenix, a CIA-led campaign during the Vietnam War known for targeted killings. Others pointed out that OP 722 matches the redacted designation of a declassified memo connected to that same program. Walter Hill was once asked about the inclusion. His response, "That's not something I remember signing off on." The production designer declined comment entirely. Was it a coincidence? An Easter egg? Or something that was never meant to be in the final cut at all? Sometimes, a film ends with resolution. Extreme Prejudice ends with a code and the invitation to look deeper. Some stories don't end with the credits. Extreme Prejudice left behind more questions than answers about what we're allowed to see, what's redacted before release, and who decides which version of the truth survives. If these facts unsettled you, you're not alone. And if you think some of them sounded too plausible to be fiction, you might be right. Which detail felt too real to ignore? And do you think that final on-screen code was just production design or a message meant for someone watching? Let us know in the comments. We're listening.